So, if you're a fearful avoidant or even an anxious preoccupied person and you're starting to learn to communicate about your needs, it can feel vulnerable at first and for multiple reasons. As an FA, it often feels vulnerable to even admit that you need something from somebody and to try to learn to rely on them. As an anxious preoccupied person in relationships, a more anxious love style without that avoidance side, there's this inherent fear of like, what if I ask for too much and then somebody abandons me? And because fearful avoidants have that anxious side as well, that anxious and avoidant side, they kind of get both ends of that continuum. What if I'm too much? Or what if I rely on somebody and then I get hurt and I just want to avoid that altogether? And so I want to cover in this video a question that I get asked nonstop all the time in the webinars, especially in PDS. And that question is, when is it appropriate to communicate my needs and when is it too much? So we'll cover that in this video and also how you can really make some changes here in a healthy way. So the first answer is that it's extremely important to communicate your needs as much as possible. And it's the how more than the communication part itself or the lack thereof. It's how you do it that really matters. Now, there may be times when you're somebody, especially if you're more anxious leaning, that it can feel like you just need something from your partner at all times. Like that there's this sort of sense of, okay, I'm opening up. But if you're on the rocks, it can feel like you just need a lot of extra validation, support, love, care, because there's this element of like feeling fragile in relationships. And that's not a bad thing. That's largely a trauma response. That's your body and your unconscious and subconscious mind just doing its work to sort of make you feel like that because you're pulling from past traumas and sort of projecting them onto the present. And every single person does that. And every single person is doing that quite frequently, by the way, even securely attached people to a certain degree. Now, what really matters is a few key points. We're going to cover 3 of them. The first point is it matters a lot how you're communicating. So there's a huge difference between communicating in the negative or in the positive. And what I mean by that is it's one thing for me to come to you and communicate kind of like retroactively or after the fact that I'm upset. And I say something like, hey, you never do the dishes. You need to start helping me. You never take your turn. I'm sick of it. That kind of communication. And even at a high level, we can say things like, oh, you don't do enough of this. And to people who are sensitive to criticism, even just saying, hey, you don't do the dishes enough around the house, even just saying that can feel conflicting. It can feel like, okay, you're ready to argue. And part of the reason for this is so many of us for years and years have these deep survival oriented responses, where as children, when we were criticized, we were often then punished. So our mind is used to following this like sort of chain of events, like criticism and then punishment. So the criticism comes and we're waiting for the punishment. We get defensive. And it's so easy for any insecure attachment style to stop listening if they hear this hint of criticism, because at a deep subconscious level, they go into kind of fight and flight mode, defensive mode, preparing for punishment mode. And so it makes conversations and communication a lot less able, I guess we could say, to be constructive. And so with that being said, the first thing here is how we speak matters. And so communicating in the positive looks like, hey, I'm going through a tough day today. I could really use some extra support. Could you take a turn doing the dishes, right? And just asking in the moment that we have a need, asking kindly, sharing our own vulnerability behind why we need that support. So somebody doesn't just hear, hey, can you do the dishes? But they hear why, they understand you. And if you are in a relationship that's worthwhile staying in, if somebody hears that you're in a vulnerable space and you need some support, they will show up. And if somebody's not that person, when you try this a few times, you will very quickly see that that person may not be worthwhile investing in long term, right? If you just see nobody showing up for your needs, even when you express in the positive, even when you're kind, even when you express, just calmly and consistently over time, then that may be a sign that it's not the right relationship, right? So the other second thing that's really important to pay attention to is when we're communicating, sometimes we'll get into this position where we think, oh, I don't want to communicate too much or be a burden or say too many things or need people too often. But the reality is, and this is a question you have to ask yourself, is it going to come out in a different way if I don't communicate about this now? Because here's what happens. The subconscious mind is a needs meeting machine. So if you don't communicate constructively, your subconscious mind will often, very, very often, find other forms of communicating instead. And this often looks like, let's say I needed help and didn't do the dishes, or to do the dishes, let's say for my husband, and he wasn't able to show up and be there, whatever it might be. And I needed help again the next day, and then the next day, and I didn't communicate. By day 3 or 4, I'm probably communicating through a lot of rolling my eyes, or a lot of, going like this. These are the things human beings do, right? When there's a lack of communication, things often come out in different ways, and they may come out as later criticism, frustration, pulling away, shutting down, body language, micro expressions, tone of voice. All of these different things are subtle forms of communication, and I think that it's very valuable to pause right here in this video and say to yourself, what are the costs to the health of my relationship when I don't communicate proactively? What happens? What do I do? How do I show up instead? Right? And really taking a look at that. I know for me, when I was fearful avoidant still, and that was my attachment style for a long time until I worked on it and learned about a lot of these things. I know that for me, I would not communicate, not communicate, not communicate. And then I would communicate with anger because I built all of that emotion up. And sometimes I wouldn't even think that I was mad. Like I'd be like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's fine. It's fine. And then eventually it just became a big deal. And it's like all of that information is still stored there subconsciously. And we're building a perception of somebody over time in relationship to a situation like the dishes or whatever thing it might be. So the less we communicate proactively, the more that your communication is going to come out in different ways. So point 2 here is to ask yourself, when it's like, when should I communicate or not? Ask yourself, is this going to come out in a different way later on? Because if it is, I can guarantee you with 100% certainty that time and time and time again, when I would communicate with people, I did a lot of sessions with people, like thousands over the years. When I would have these conversations with people, it's like, yes, there's a little bit of, oh, we communicate, but if we do it healthily and normally and proactively, that puts very little burden on a relationship compared to the burden of conflict from negative communication, unhealthy communication, indirect communication, like we communicate when we're frustrated and we just shut down, or we say nothing's wrong, but really there is something wrong, or we communicate through rolling our eyes, or these parts of body language, or sighing, or these sort of frustrated elements of communication. That's what actually creates burden and harm to a relationship, not communicating in the positive. So I just want to really voice that because it's super important. And then the third thing is we can practice. By the way, before I do this third one, we have a whole course about this that dives into this in detail. It gives you scripts. It gives you little like things to fill in the blanks around. And it's called the Conflict Resolution course. It's inside PDS. You can use the link below and you can check it out for free for 7 days, which is more than enough time to get through a course. All of the courses at PDS, in my opinion, are 100 times better than the videos because they have worksheets, workbooks, everything's laid out. I have more time. We get to the root more. We explain the how to do things in way more detail because it's not just a 10-minute video. So if there's a topic that resonates with you, like go into a course, check it out. It's free for 7 days. And then you can go through and sort of get in there and learn at a much deeper level than just this channel can provide. So anyways, so number 3 being, if you're like, should I communicate or not? A good thing to practice is it depends where you are in the space, right? If you're really anxious leaning, part of like what we're seeking is the middle ground. We're seeking healthy interdependence. So we're seeking the ability to voice our needs and receive them from others. And we're also seeking the ability to rely on others in a healthy way, right? If you look at the more avoidant side of relationship people, they tend to be terrified to rely on others. It makes them feel weak or afraid or helpless or powerless or, fear of betrayal and all these different things. So we're trying to come to the middle ground. So if you're really anxious leaning and you find that you go to others to meet your needs way more than you meet your needs yourself, a good practice is to practice meeting your needs first in relationship to self. And then if it didn't solve for the problem, then going to the person second. So for example, and there's a big reason for this that's beyond just like the practicality of it. there's the interdependent element, which is like, hey, the more we have established a strong sense of relationship to self, the more stable we feel in relationships as a whole, because we don't feel like everybody outside of us is the only source of getting our needs met. So just logically, interdependency comes from having healthy relationship to self and also healthy relationship to communicating and asking for my needs from others. But the other part here is that your subconscious mind is primed to receive its needs from others when we already have a subconscious comfort zone built in around this. So, an example of this could be, let's say I'm very unself validating. Let's pretend that forever, and even now, we'll pretend that I am like always invalidating towards myself, critical, mean, all these different things. Even if I ask for validation from somebody, even if I ask for like acknowledgement or support or help somebody out, or I'm like, hey, I'm having a bad day. Can you help me just feel encouraged for a moment? And I say that to somebody, even if I'm doing those things, right? What ends up happening is if my subconscious comfort zone is like one of invalidation and self-criticism, when somebody comes to me and says, oh, you're doing a, a great thing today, whatever it is, like if somebody's encouraging or whatever I would, in theory ask for, and somebody comes and builds me up and says nice things, guess what my subconscious mind does that's used to its comfort zone? It goes, oh, they don't mean it. They're just being nice. They don't actually feel this way. And you'll see this in your own patterns of behavior if you struggle to receive compliments. If you can't just say, hey, that's really sweet. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And just receive. You can receive with humility, but just receive. And because when somebody's giving you the gift of a compliment or something nice, they're trying to connect with you, right? And so if you're blocking it, it's like blocking connection indirectly. So when you can receive, that shows that you've got a bit of a good subconscious comfort zone around that. And if you're really struggling and you're always deflecting, then your subconscious comfort zone is not wired to receive. So then, even if you go to a relationship as a more anxious leaning person to try to get your needs met, if your whole subconscious comfort zone there is not meeting those needs, you don't receive effectively. It's like a bucket, and it's like this very short term hit of gratification, like, oh, they said a nice thing. And then right away, the gravity happened, the hole is at the bottom of the bucket, it fell back out the bottom, and that feeling is gone. And it creates this everlasting hunger for a need to be met because you haven't developed a subconscious comfort zone around it in the relationship to yourself first. So you'll see, like, somebody gives you a compliment, you're like, that's nice, but they probably don't mean it. Out the bucket. Or they're just being nice, or they said that because they had to. And you'll deflect in some way or safeguard to prevent yourself from receiving, because it's not a part of what your subconscious comfort zone is, and what feels familiar is supposed to be safe to your subconscious mind. So by meeting your needs yourself first and then going to somebody else, if you're more anxious leaning, it's extremely helpful. And if you're very avoidant leaning, then the practice of just asking for your needs is going to largely be reasonable, because you probably very rarely do it. And so as you do that, as long as you're making sure you're meeting your own needs part of the time too, so you're developing that comfort zone for proper reception from others, that's how you're going to have this whole sort of system working for you at a subconscious level without you constantly having to think about it long term. So 3 major things, super important. Again, if you want to check out that communication course, the link for free is down below. There's a coupon code there too that is for 25% off. So if you want to stay beyond that 7 days, then you can use that coupon code as well at the checkout. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and you enjoy the content on this channel. And I will see you in future videos.